too often we're speaking about whether you're driving growth or innovation, or you're doing the opposite, like as binary forms. And I think we need to try not to make it one or the other type of approach, and sort of embrace that either one would require very specific responses. Like I said in my introductory remarks, one of the concerns in the AI research community is that speaking about the limitations of the systems are often seen as a threat to kind of R&D and innovation processes, where people are being, like I said, vilified or even pushed out of those processes, which in the end, leads to poorer innovation and products that are not properly tested. So I think, taking that time, making sure, so rather than incentivizes, rather speak about taking the time to do the proper testing and certification, validation, and verification to actually see that scientific investments, that you're having real return of investment of the R&D that you're putting to use. We also, and to of course then discuss the societal impact, which will be very important for the ROI in the end of the day. One of our eminent advisors, Andrew Marchant, did a review of 634 different sort of policy guidelines that were meant to provide this, or are meant to provide this type of incentives or guidelines for doing responsible AI development. And what's interesting, of course, after reviewing the 634 different types of instruments holding different types of standards and sort of weight, the fallback, or sort of the weakness with all of them, was that none of them really had an implementation framework. How do you actually, what's the benchmark for ensuring that what you're doing is delivering on purpose and delivering particularly on the ethical considerations and societal impact considerations? And I think that's instrumental to any discussion on responsible R&D and responsible science. I also just want to add a point that we speak a lot about governance. I think we were speaking about having younger people involved. We also need a new type of dialogue, like how do we hold this type of dialogues and how do we discuss governance? And I think when you speak about governance in the technology space, it often fails to look at that we need different types of governance depending on where we are in the life cycle of the technology. So where you are in the initial phases of the development phase of it, it looks very different from where you are in terms of the deployment and the embedment phase of the technology. And even as you're starting to see it being part of a critical system that you are embedding various AI systems into. So we also need to avoid the temptation of treating governance as this one kind of bucket concept, and look at what does governance look like in the different aspects of its deployment. And that's very important. And for that, I think we need to also be ready and honest about some of the current format of having that dialogue may not be appropriate to where we need to go on this. This has to do with the multi-stakeholder aspect that Janusz was referring to, but also these stakeholders are sometimes also part of these vested interests that we were referring to earlier. So making sure that you're not just replacing one kind of group with another one, where you're not actually tackling the interest aspect of where you're driving this innovation and the R&D.